as we go along, please fire them in. That's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine by me. So I'm Eddie Asprey. I'm Northern Reserves Officer on a Monday and Thursday, and I'm Tame Force Development Officer on a Tuesday. I've been with the Trust for 14 years, and yeah, I was doing woodlands for quite a few of those years. Absolutely love trees, mad passionate about them. So that's me. I think the aim of this session, if you can identify 5 trees at the end of it, some of the more common trees, I'll be pleased about that. Do you want to let in, Lucy, do you want to let in, or shall I let in?
So I can do it.
So if I press admit, that's fine.
Let me worry about letting people in, and you
okay on the top. Okay, so I thought I'd start off with asking the question, what is a tree and what is a shrub? And it's not too scientific, really. A tree's a large woody perennial plant, typically having a single stem or a trunk, growing to a considerable height and bearing lateral horizontal branches at some distance from the ground. And then a shrub is something similar, really, but not as tall, typically 6 to 10 meters tall, and again being perennial and woody. Not too scientific, really. So what's the history of trees across the UK? You know, where do they come from? How long have they been here? And it goes back, really. Trees have their origins. Well, the UK has its origins in something we call the wildwood. Now, the wildwood is a lovely romantic idea, and really it was the wood, the tree landscape that was not messed about with by man, that covered the UK before man came along, and it covered right from the top of Scotland right to the toe of Cornwall. And instead of being a solid woodland, it was a patchwork of woodlands, of grasslands, of scrub, wetlands along watercourses, and it colonised the UK landscape 10,000 years ago, after the last ice age, when we were connected to Europe, across kind of right across where the North Sea is now, across Doggerland. That's worth a research if anybody is interested in that kind of thing. When we were connected, there was this large area of which is now under the North Sea, called Doggerland, that connected us to Europe. It's worth a Google if you're interested in that kind of thing. Now, it reached what we call a natural equilibrium between 7,000 and 5,000 years ago. And what it looked like, it looked probably, if you're looking at it as a gardener, it looked pretty scruffy, like you'd want to tidy it up. It was patchy. There would have been huge bits of dead wood all over the place. It would have had herbivores such as, you know, brown bears, elk, aurochs, which is wild cow, pony, deer. They were grazing that patchwork, and they were creating conditions that for the invertebrates and the birds, and to a certain extent, since man came along and drove out or shot those, not shot necessarily, hunted them, the large herbivores. Since then, our management of our nature reserves and the management that we do somewhat mimics that. We come along with our chainsaws and brush cutters and bow saws, and we chop back areas of vegetation, and to a certain extent that mimics the action of herbivores and creates these nice open conditions that the invertebrates and the birds and all the species that we now favor, it recreates those. we've got just a couple of photographs that I put on there. The top one is Pooley Fields Advocate Pools, which shows a willow that is just doing what it wants to do and falling apart and rerouting. And there would have been trees like that all over the place in the wildwood. And then the photo bottom right is just what looks like a very sphagnum covered mossy kind of woodland, probably somewhere quite humid. So probably like the west coast of the UK. Now, so we have our wildwood, and then we have man coming along, starting to living in that wildwood and starting to clear it. And he was doing that from Neolithic period, so 5,500 years before present. And with the advance in agriculture, he knocked back woodland cover, so that it was 50% of the UK area by, say, 2,500 years ago. But by the time of the Domesday Book, so 900 years ago, woodland cover was right down to 15%. Today, it's what have I written there on the right? So it's about 13% today, which has crept up slightly from 5% at the start of the 20th century, but a significant chunk of that is coniferous forest. And that information there that I can't see because the zoom bar is partially obscuring it. So that breaks down what the woodland cover is across the UK landscape. Bottom right photograph is a project that I've been involved in the last couple of weeks, which is planting some woodland. It's not particularly dense, as you can see, over in Philongley near Coventry. So these planting schemes are slowly but surely increasing woodland cover. So what is meant by a native tree and a non-native tree? Because I particularly want to focus on our native trees today, because there's 32 of them, and the non-native ones there's many more than that. But from a countryside point of view, I particularly want to concentrate on the native ones today. So I'll not go through them all, but there are 32 species of native trees and shrubs. You can see them there. And then over the page, we have our native shrubs. Now, of course, in the UK landscape, in people's gardens and escapes into the wild, there are tens, possibly hundreds of species of non-natives that add to our landscape. Some detract from it a little bit, but we tend to be less concerned about non-native trees spreading because they are much slower growing, and you can control them to a certain extent. But there's plenty of non-native trees that we're really familiar with. Apple trees, horse chestnut trees like conkers, sweet chestnuts, which go to make horse chestnut fencing, Norway maples, Leyland cypress, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, monkey puzzle trees. That's definitely one of my favorite non-native trees. Monkey puzzles, they're fantastic. We have larch, we have London plane, which of course are planted in urban landscapes. So many non-native trees. So I thought, what are the features that we can use to identify a tree in winter? Because of course in winter we don't have the leaves, which are a big giveaway, and we do obviously have some tree leaves, the evergreens and the conifers, they still retain them, but all our native deciduous trees, we need to be able to identify them in winter And these are the features that we can use. We can use trunk and bark. We can use crown shape, size or characteristics. Now that one is tricky, and you really need to be looking at a lot of trees to recognize a tree from its crown shape. We can use leaves where they're retained. I'm thinking about holly, oak retains some of its leaves into the winter. They go quite crinkly and brown, and so does beech. We can use shoots and buds. Now, shoots and buds are a real one that I want to focus on. We can use flowers. We can use flowers now, and we can use retained fruits as well. Okay, so taking each of those in turn, we can use bark. Now, the photograph there is some alder bark, older bark from an old tree on the left and a younger tree on the right. Now you can see how much it differs. So you need to be aware of the age of the tree and the variation in species and perhaps the season as well. So we can use crown shape as well. This is you best look at a tree, I think, with a guide, because like I said, you need to kind of really get your eye in and know what you're looking for to be able to identify a tree just from its crown shape. So you're probably best to use a guide. Now I just had a quick Google the other day, and there are really loads of really good tree guides out there on the internet. Just Google it. There's even apps now that you can use, and that link at the bottom was really good as well. There's some really interesting stuff on there for crown shape. I just put that picture there of the ash stem with its retained fruit, the keys. Now, ash sweeps up at the end of the lower branches, and that's a really characteristic thing that ash does. So you can use features like that to identify your tree. We can look at leaves, perhaps. I've written leaves ? So on the left there, that photograph is some kind of beech grove where we can see some of the retained leaves. If you can get hold of those leaves and spread them out in your hand, you should be able to identify a tree from that. And then, of course, holly there, that particular one is growing in my garden. Holly is a really distinctive leaf, so we may be able to use those in winter. Buds. Buds are perhaps the best way to identify a tree in winter, and we need to take note of the colour. Is there a single bud or a cluster of buds at the end of the terminal of the stem, so the end of the stem? What I mean by that is the photograph on the top right is ash, and you can see a single bud on the end of the stem, that black single bud. Or if we were to look at the photo on the bottom right or the one above it, you can see a cluster of buds on the end of the stem of the branch. And if we look at those, we can use that to identify it. Now, the bud scales are just simply the kind of scales that then burst to produce the leaf, and we can look at those. We can also look along the stem about whether the buds grow along the stem, whether they are alternate. I can't see the bottom right photograph. I think that's the hazel that I put on there. So that the buds grow alternatively along the stem, or they grow opposite, like the photograph of the bottom two on the right. You can see that those buds are opposite. That is Sycamore. We can have some further description of the bud. The photograph on the top right is a willow or a poplar, and you can see that the buds are quite close against the stem, and that's characteristics of willows. That's called appressed. You can see the buds on the top right are quite, if you feel them, they would feel quite waxy. And then bottom right, we have they are quite hairy, and that's Rowan. We can also note the colour of the bud as well. Now, if you take, and I appreciate I've kind of rattled through those as quite quickly, but those are the features that if you were to get a guide, you could go into the field, and if you had some awareness of all those different features, you could go out and, using a guide or using an app on a phone, you could start identifying your tree in winter. Other features that we might be able to use are Hazel Catkin or Catkins. On the right, I've got, I can't see it. We've got Hazel Catkins, and they can be seen from January, February, March. Left, we have alder cones, which are really distinctive of alder. They are green in the summer as they're growing, and go to brown in the winter, and they are really characteristic of alder. And on the right, in kind of September, October, November, December, we have the Hawthorne berries, and they're quite vivid. We can use those to identify Hawthorn. And we have, for example, sloes on blackthorn. Spines or thorns are another feature that we can use on native shrubs. There are, going out, just simply going out into the countryside adjacent to farmers' fields and hedgerows, those two that I've photographed there are the main two that you will come across. So we have blackthorn on the left, which is a much larger thorn, and often have buds on that thorn as it grows. And then we have on the right, we have hawthorn, which is quite subtly different. The thorns are much smaller and tend to grow in the junction between the stem and the leaf, which will normally grow underneath. So those are the two main ones with thorns. Now, what is everybody okay with that? Any questions about what I've just covered? I have rattled through it, but is there any questions about that before we go on to take some species, and we'll look at them and how we can identify them? Is that okay?
Yeah, no. Oh, Ian, if you want to unmute and ask something.
No, I was just saying, okay, really good so far. Keep going, Eddie.
Is that all right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right. What I thought I'd do now is I've got a combination of videos. Now I don't really know what these videos are going to be like, because I went out the other day and did it, and my wife filmed it on my phone. So I don't think that the country file presenters will have much to worry about. But yeah, let's see how it goes. We'll do, I can't remember how many I've got, 6 or 10 species that I'm gonna focus on, and yeah, let's give it a go. So my first one is Alder. Alder is Alder's glutinosa, and Alder is a wetland tree, normally found alongside river banks. It enjoys full sun and not too much competition. Now the buds there, as you can see on the left, are ready. There is the cone is still present at the minute, and the catkin is there as well. If you see a group of alder growing alongside, and you look up at the canopy, you can see the cones and the catkins as well. But they also look kind of purpley as well. They look purpley in the sun, and they're a beautiful tree. Really, they're one of my favourite trees, particularly in wetlands. The timber that if you were to chop through the timber, if you needed to fell it for any reason, or chop some branches off it, the timber goes this fantastic, really vibrant orange colour. And the timber is used frequently for pilings underwater, because it's really rot resistant. So that's Alder. Is that okay? Any questions, or anybody wish to input on that? No?
Can I just ask, the cones, would they be easily distinguishable from pine cones?
Yes, yeah. The cone isn't actually like, it's not a true cone. It is, now let me get this right. I don't want to tell you, it is actually a catkin. So what have I got? Oh, I can't find it in a minute. But the cone is actually either the male or the female catkin. So it was the flower, and then it goes on to change form into a cone, and then the cone has the seed, and that's how the tree reproduces. So it's not a true cone, but it is very distinctive. If you find that tree growing alongside a river with the catkins on it and the brown cone, you will a no leaf, you will immediately, that's the only tree it can be.
Eddie, didn't you have a picture of it on the previous slide? If you go,
If I go back, how do I go back?
Oh no, go there. Right, stop. Yeah, that one. So you see it, the little cones in the left-hand picture. Those are the older cones, so they're much smaller and more distinctive compared to something like a pine cone. They really are quite tiny compared to something like a pine cone.
Yeah, they're about the size of. Have I got anything in the house I can show you? Is a dice. Look, they're probably about that, aren't they? So that's a. They're very small.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So I can't. Let me just move the. Is the one on the right a video? I can't, because my. Let me just move that. No, it's not. So, birch. Birch is a very distinctive tree. It's the only tree that has that white peeling bark. There are two species of birch. One is the much more common one, which is the silver birch, Betula pendula. And of those three photographs, the one on the right is the one with the white kind of dots or scales on it. That's the silver birch with those white scales on it. And then the middle photograph is the Downy birch. Quite similar, but the Downy birch is obviously downy, hairy. So as you can see from the photograph on the left, they're beautiful trees. They're extensively planted. They are a pioneer species, so they would have spread quickly across the UK landscape after the last ice age. They spread by a light wind-blown seed. They cast a pretty light shade and create woodland conditions suitable for other more long-lived species such as oak and that kind of thing to come in. But they're pretty easy to identify with that very white bark. As it gets older, the bark at the bottom of the stem goes really quite gnarly and cracky. It's difficult to show on that one, but they're a fairly distinctive tree. Is that okay? Does anybody got any questions about birch? The canopy is quite twiggy as well. It's quite a kind of light, fine canopy in it. Is that okay?
Easy to tell the difference between the silver birch and the other variety.
The other varieties of birch, the more planted ones.
I think Holly asked the same question.
Yeah. There's a question from Holly saying, do both Downey and silver birch have silver papery bark?
Yes. Yes, they do. Yeah. The silver birch is the much more common one, which is common across much of England. The Downy birch is the one that's more of an upland one, heathlands and upland areas up into Scotland. So yeah, silver birch is a more common one. It's the same species as well that grows across Norway and Sweden, and it's, you know, it'll grow where it's particularly cold as well. So much more the north than Scotland. So yeah, beautiful tree. And of course there are in the UK landscape many cultivars and like garden species of it that have got different characteristics of more peely bark and that kind of thing. So be aware of those that are planted on, you know, on planting schemes in urban areas, but most of the ones that you find in the countryside will just be silver birch. So everybody all right with that? On to the next species. Now, okay, so we have Hazel. Now let's see how we go on with this chap here on the right.
Here we have Hazel. Hazel is definitely a component of a Warwickshire oak woodland. It does well on neutral to acidic soils. Hazel pretty much always grows multi-stemmed. It coppices really strongly. It doesn't really grow with one stem. It is an understory shrub, and it's very favoured for the timber products that it creates. So it goes on to create the stakes and binders for hedge laying, for wattle and daub, for hurdles, and is a good firewood as well. Now the buds, well, as you can see on this one, have burst, but the buds are alternate along the stem and are green, and it creates this kind of zigzag along the stem. The bark is smooth, grey brown. Like I said, always grows multi-stem. It's probably a good place to show you about coppicing. Now, coppicing involves chopping a tree down, a native tree, and most of our native broadleaf trees coppice. So if the tree is cut down to ground level, the rootstock will regenerate by throwing up lots of stems. This is the way that that woodlands would have been traditionally managed, and on a cycle anywhere between 7 and 20 years. And really, it's sustainable. The tree will carry on throwing up new stems almost forever when it is cut and treated in this way. Hazel coppices really strongly, and so do most of our broadleaf trees. By doing coppicing, it allows light down onto the woodland floor, promoting the growth of bluebells, violets, and all the native woodland flora. And that's really how woodlands would have been traditionally managed.
Countryfile, here we come. Is that okay? I just wanted to introduce coppicing because coppicing is how our woodlands would have been traditionally managed, and will create timber almost forever. A product will be made, or firewood, and that's how they would be managed. And that is how a lot of our native wildlife, our birds, our butterflies, are adapted to the conditions that is created by coppicing. Any questions on either hazel or coppicing as a technique?
You've got one in the chat from Mick, which is, how big do hazels grow if left uncoppiced?
Quite big. They will get some big chunky stems on them, like that. They quite big, but always multi-stemmed. They will never grow with a single stem. There's some big ones in Tosel wood, but if you leave them, they will just simply eventually die. But coming along and coppicing them, the rootstock will last for millennia, forever really. Of course, the association with coppicing is with dormice. And go on, Lucy, tell us about dormice and what we've got going on in some of the sites.
I'll leave that for a minute, because we've got another question that says, how long ago was that one in the video coppiced?
That where I was there, that was a plantation. Probably that's about, I don't know what you think, 4 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. It might be longer, because it was probably planted in the last 20 years, but then it's probably been subsequently coppiced.
The stems are quite thick, aren't they?
Yeah, but it will grow in Wappenbury, for example, when we've done coppicing there. And if it can get away, the growth in the first year after one summer's worth of growth, it can be 1 metre tall. So it's really, it coppices really strongly. Unfortunately, it's quite palatable to deer. Muntjac will take it, which can really knock it back. But yeah, it'll coppice really strongly. Go on, Lucy, any questions?
No, that's it.
That's it. So I think I think it comes into nut, doesn't it? About year 7. I think that's right, Lucy. And
yeah, it's getting on for that, because that's, if you have just referring back to the dormice, if you're coppicing less than a 7-year rotation, and you really want to be something like that's minimum of 10 years, I think, you're not producing any hazelnuts for the dormice to eat.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Next one is oak. That photograph on the left, which is not a great photograph, again is Pooley Fields, and will just show you what oak will do if it's left its own devices. They produce some fantastic gnarly looking trees, but here we have me again.
Here we have an oak, a mighty oak. Oaks can be identified by a cluster of brown buds at the end of the stem. Okay, oaks are large trees, native trees, and there are 2 native species. These species are the peduncular oak, where the acorn is on a stalk or a peduncule, and the other species, which is Mast or sessile oak, where the leaf is on a short stalk. Now, that latter species tends to be the more northerly and western species, whereas the other one, the peduncular oak, is the lowland English oak. Okay, so that's oak.
Okay, lots and lots of folklore as well surrounding oaks. They are very much a favoured tree across the UK landscape. It's likely that they are kind of overrepresented because people favoured them and so would weed out other species. Warwickshire grows great oaks because the soil is neutral to acidic, so it grows oaks really well. There's parts of Wappenbury that's got some great oaks, and Ryton as well has got some good oaks. Quite slow growing. Yeah, the leaf is obviously the National Trust logo as well. So, but yeah, that's oak. Any questions, or anybody want to input anything about oak?
Are they one of the most common trees in the UK?
Probably, yes. They're quite definitely in woodlands, unless it's of course it's a plantation. The English oak is a lot more common. They were obviously planted extensively for timber to go on to make boats and that kind of thing, and building, of course, as well, because it's such a strong wood. Yeah, it's difficult to say. Certainly very common, and there's no concern about them from a conservation point of view. They kind of have this weird thing where they are what you call the climax. They're a climax tree. They're a woodland will always, a woodland that regenerates from kind of open soil will have undergo a succession, say from bramble and then to hawthorn and perhaps birch, and then the more slow growing oak will come along and regenerate underneath that. But for some reason, oak doesn't really like regenerating well under its own canopy. So it's kind of weird that in Wappenbury you get, for example, you used to get, well, I've not been there for a few years, but you used to get loads of oak saplings in the grassland areas that you want to keep as grasslands. So it actually end up being cut by our mowers. But you tend to get much less of them in the woodlandy bit where you actually want them. So we don't really know the reason for that, about why they don't regenerate well under their own canopy. Maybe woodlands go in cycles where, you know, an oak will seed into areas where there are other species or where there's birch growing instead of under its own canopy. Or maybe there's kind of this rain of insects that always comes down off them and nibbles off the regrowth. Or maybe it's an undersoil thing. I've not researched it for quite a while, but we don't really know, or rather I don't really know why that is.
Is any of it down to squirrels burying them and then forgetting them where they've buried them?
Or jays?
True.
Possibly. I don't know. They certainly like lots of light to get to regenerate, which in some ways makes you think they're a pioneer species. So I don't know. Any more input on that? Okay. Ash. Ash is definitely another one of my favourite trees. Yeah, let's launch into hearing this chap here.
Here we have ash. Ash has a jet black bud, and the buds are also in pairs along the stem. Another feature is these keys, which are present throughout the winter. We also have the stems which sweep up at the end skywards. Ash is considered to be the queen of firewoods. It burns when it's almost green due to its quite low moisture content. And ash timber can be used for tool handles and for furniture, because it can be bent and steamed to create arches and that kind of thing. It is native large tree, grows up to say 30 metres, does particularly well on neutral and alkali soils. Yeah, part of the scene for quite a long time.
What else to say? A good place to see ash is Wappenbury. If you go down to Wappenbury and you go down the Stoned Ride and you carry on down sloped as if you're going towards kind of Bubbenhall, for some reason the soil goes slightly neutral or acidic, and there's some good ash down there, and there's also things that are associated, things like field maple. There's some of the ground flora that's associated with more neutral to alkali soils. Like I said, the ash is the queen of firewoods. It splits quite easily. Firewood producers love it. It's a pale wood. It splits easily. But we are concerned about it at the minute with ash dieback. Sorry, let me just move my bar so I can see. So that there's a fungus there. I'll not even try and produce. I'll not even try and say that. The fungus which causes the ash dieback, and that leads to leaf loss and crown dieback, and eventually can kill trees. It might take 20 years to kill some of the larger ones, but we are very, very concerned about it. To the point where we're having to take action in some of our woodlands, like places like Snitterfield Bushes, where we have almost pure stands of ash. We are needing to go in and do some thinning, and get some other species planted and get some other species going, because we simply just can't. We don't want to lose woodland in that area, and that might happen if ash dieback really hammers places like Snitterfield Bushes. It's really concerning. There's lots of good information about ash dieback on the Forestry Commission website. Any questions about ash?
Yes, we've got one from Mick, which is, what is the relation between ash and the rowan?
There is none. The only relation is rowan is called mountain ash. Ash is Fraxinus excelsior and rowan is Sorbus orchiperia. They are completely different genus. I can see why people might say that when it's in leaf, if you get a mountain ash or a rowan leaf and you get an ash leaf, they're superficially quite similar. They've got the same form and they've got the same leaflets, but they're not related at all.
That's
Any others, Lucy? No, that's it.
No.
Oh yeah, moving on to rowan. Rowan or mountain ash, or mountain as I've written there. It's a small tree, less than 10 meters, and it's an occasional component of Warwickshire's woodland. There are some in Wrighton Wood. That's what it is. It's a woodland, a small woodland understory tree. But of course, it's common as a street tree. It has the white blossom and the red berries, but it's other cultivars are planted as well. So you get the ones with orange berries, and I think there's a white berried one as well. It has red berries loved by thrushes and songbirds, and it can be identified by that white hairy bud. And the bark has horizontal lines on it, which apparently are breeding pores as well, which I never realised. Yeah, it's a small tree. It's planted frequently in urban areas because it is just simply a small tree. It doesn't grow into a great massive oak or ash. So yeah, that's rowan. Any questions about rowan? I would just add that it grows up to quite high altitudes as well. So it's on moorlands and heathlands, Cannock Chase, Peak District. It's quite common. Any questions? Can you see, Lucy?
No, you're all right.
Hawthorn, another one of my favourite trees.
Hang on, one's picked up, but it wasn't showing flashing. Sorry. Joanne's asked, would rowan be suitable for a garden? Yes.
Yes. Yeah, check it out. Check out the full details of it. But it's a small tree. It's good for wildlife. You get loads of songbirds on it and bees that will come and use the blossom and then the berries. So yeah, it's a good tree. Research how far you can plant it from your house, but obviously not too close to your house. But yeah, it's a small tree suitable for gardens. Yeah. Okay, next one, hawthorn.
Okay, so here we have the hawthorn, and we have two species of native hawthorn. The white blossomed one, which is common hawthorn, which is much more common. There is also the Midland or Woodland Hawthorne, which has the pink blossom, which is much less common. Okay, as the name suggests, it has thorns, and we can use these to identify it in winter. We also have, perhaps look at that one there, alternate buds along the stem, and these sometimes end with a thorn. Now, hawthorn was planted frequently to create stock-proof hedges, so really is probably overrepresented in the countryside, but is a fantastic understory shrub. It coppices really strongly, responds very strongly to being cut. The blossom then goes on to make haws, which we can see here. They've dried up now because they're from last year. But yeah, that's hawthorn.
So it does get quite large actually, hawthorn, and gets a big old chunky stem on it. Some really interesting shapes as well in the trunk. So the photograph there on the left is a hedgerow from, planted with hawthorn. You can see it's been cut in the past and perhaps even laid in the past as well. So yeah, fantastic resource. What else to say about hawthorn? It coppices really strongly. The regrowth is unfortunately quite palatable to deer, so so you do have to watch out for that. I think that's it. That's hawthorn. Any questions about hawthorn?
You mentioned haws. Is that the fruit that produce?
Yes, that's the fruit. They're haws. Yeah, and they're really, thrushes and songbirds will take those as well. So and that's of course how the plant reproduces. So I just said in the video about the other species of hawthorn, which is the Midland or Woodland Hawthorne. I've never seen it in any of our woodlands, but I believe it is present. I can't, off the top of my head, think about what the difference is between the two species, apart from the colour of the blossom. Do you know, Lucy, about the differences between Midland and Woodland, the common and the Midland hawthorn? You're on mute, Lucy.
Do you know what? Sorry, I used to go back 20 years ago. I used to, and I'm
Don't worry.
Yeah, I'll try and go back, and it's something to do. The way something divides, or the berry genetics, because there's a difference in the Latin name that signifies it, and I can't remember it. I'll look when I'm sending this out as a PDF and the link to the video and the evaluation form, I will endeavour to remember it or find it out, and I'll put it on. There is one question from Holly which says, can deer kill a recently coppiced tree?
Can deer?
Yeah.
Yeah, they can, if where deer are heavily grazing year after year a hazel, it will never get away and they can kill it. But deer pressure needs to be pretty high for that. Most of the time they can just about get away, but what you have to remember is that Warwickshire Wildlife Trust don't manage our woodlands commercially, but if we were, then deer would be impacting upon the the commercial viability of that woodland and of that crop by really quite suppressing how well the coppice stools will regrow, will get away. And if you were, if you were managing a stand of hazel and your deer are really impacting on that, and you were managing it, say, for stakes and binders, then you'd be worried and you'd be wanting to do something about the deer numbers. So they can do, but they need to be. The succinct answer is yes, they can do, but it needs to be quite high grazing pressure. Okay, on to the next. Blackthorn. Try and avoid getting stabbed by blackthorn because it goes septic, which is a lovely thought.
Here we have blackthorn. Thorns of blackthorn develop after the flower. Okay, so the characteristic thorns are on the older wood. Now, blackthorns develop blossom before the leaf, as it's a member of the cherry or prunus family, whereas hawthorn gets the leaf first and then the blossom. Another characteristic of it is it forms these dense thickets that you can see in front of you because it sends out underground suckers which go on to colonize new areas. Blackthorn, the timber is good firewood, and it's said to bake the sweetest bread. Birds absolutely love it because it's of the defensive thorns on it, and also the brown and black hair-streaked butterfly lays its eggs on the leaf, and it's then food plant for the caterpillars. So that's blackthorn. The other thing to say about blackthorn is that where it grows on the motorway verges at the minute, it creates these kind of large half moon or semicircle areas of blackthorn, which often come right down to the carriageway, and are actually look beautiful now because they are in white blossom. So that's blackthorn.
This is the species that forms these really dense thickets, as you can see, and that's blackthorn. That's a really characteristic feature of what blackthorn does. Okay, any questions? I think I saw a hand put up, didn't I? There, Lucy. Did I see somebody put up? Did Chris put their hand up?
I was applauding your country file-esque performance there. Well done. I'll do an actual clap. Well done.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, it's a fascinating species, blackthorn. Yeah, I mentioned about don't try and avoid getting spiked by it, because the tip apparently will break off in you and then will get in your bloodstream, which is not a nice thought. Okay, moving on. How are we doing for time? 11:08. Cherry. Now that's in the video I couldn't reach a branch to show you because it was right up in the canopy, but I gave it a go anyway.
Here we have a cherry. There are two species of native cherry. There's the bird cherry and the wild cherry. Now, cherries have this horizontal banding on them, and unfortunately I can't show you a bud because they're way up in the canopy, and all these ones at low level are all dead. but cherries are frequently planted as street trees as well, due to their attractive white blossom. Because cherries are a member of the prunus family, they also, like blackthorn, throw out underground roots, which go on to create new cherry trees. So what you often find is like a colony of them. Okay, so that's cherry.
And the bud, as you can see there on the left-hand photograph, is kind of a cluster, a brown bud. So yeah. Okay, any questions about cherry? No.
Nothing at the moment, but I am going to quickly say now, while I remember, the hawthorn, the common hawthorn, and I knew it was in the Latin, the monogyna.
Monogyna, yeah.
Gyna, it's because it only produces one seed.
Yeah.
The clue's in the name, and then Midland Hawthorne will produce
Lady
two or
Dart.
more. So yeah, produce two or more.
Okay.
But there you go. There's your answer.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. Sycamore. Now, I said at the start really that I was only going to cover natives. Sycamore isn't strictly native, but it's naturalized, so it acts like a native tree. It freely sets seed. It regenerates well in the UK landscape. It's naturalized right into some of our ancient woodlands, for better or for worse. So here we go.
This is sycamore. Sycamore has a green bud, and which, as you can see, is on the end of the stem, and then they also grow alternate as well along the stem. Sycamore is an introduced tree. It was introduced in the 16th century. It has a smooth bark, as you can see, but it tends to crack into plates or very mature specimens. People consider, foresters consider sycamore occasionally to be a bit of a weed tree. It spreads very easily, all over the place very freely. It can grow at the expense of more desirable species, but recently, with the future of ash looking at the threat, it is viewed and it is planted by people who maybe consider a replacement for ash. It's a good wood. The wood splits easily. Also, it's a tree that is very strong. Okay, so that's sycamore.
Quite windy there, I think, wasn't it? So the reason that it's not viewed particularly in a favourable light by conservationists is because it's said that it doesn't support the same amount of invertebrates, for example. People say that an oak or a willow will support maybe 300 or 500 species of invertebrates and species, whereas something like a sycamore might only support 30. However, if you were able to get hold of all those invertebrates and put them in a weighing bowl, the biomass, as we will call it, of those invertebrates would be the same as it would be in an oak. It's just in the oak, it's a wider range of species. So that's the reason it's viewed, well, traditionally it was viewed dimly by conservationists. Okay, any input about sycamore? So it's the green bud, and then as it comes into leaf, it has the large hand-shaped leaf.
There's one, I was just going to say quickly, it's also got an antibacterial wood, hasn't it? It's used for chopping boards.
Yes.
Because it's seen as naturally antibacterial. I missed my apologies, Pete. There was a question about cherry trees, which is cherry suitable for gardens? I'd say yes.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't turn into a massive tree, but just be aware of those underground suckers that will make new trees. Yeah. Shall we? Shall I move on, because it's nearly 11:15? Yeah. There's only a few more of these videos. Beech. I think this was quite a short one. Oh no! Whoops.
Here we have beech. Beech is a large tree. It likes chalky, well-drained soil, particularly in the southeast of the country where it is native. It has a cigar-like bud that grows alternatively along the stem. Another feature is, as you can see, it has kept some of last year's leaf over the winter, so that's another feature for identification. The other thing is beech mast, which is traditionally used to fatten up pigs. Another feature may be the buttressing at the base of the main stem. This particular one has got quite bark. The bark is normally more typical of that one over there. Okay, that's beech.
Native in the southeast of the country, not necessarily native up here, even though it will quite freely regenerate up here and create its own saplings. So beech. Any questions about beech? No. Holly. I think we've got time for that. Whoops.
Here we have holly. It's an evergreen plant with spiky oval leaves, and the females go on to bear fruit.
That's the female trees go on to bear berries. Yeah, it's particularly, it gets more spiky as a defensive mechanism to put off grazing animals. Often, if you look up above head height, the leaves can be less spiky. Okay. Willow. Where's my mouse gone?
Here we have willow. There are 7 species of native willow. 3 are trees and 4 are considered to be large shrubs. Now, willows normally grow alongside watercourses and on ditches and in damp areas. The buds tend to lie quite flat along the stem. Perhaps the best example is that one there. They lie quite flat along the stem and are alternate. Willows are fast growing and some of the species can be fast growing but quite fragile, like crack willow, which is frequent in Warwickshire, and so called because when the twigs break off, they make a cracking noise. So that's willow.
You can do whole training courses on willows. They can be quite difficult to identify. There's lots of different species, and unfortunately they hybridize. Willows do produce seed, but also where the branches fall off and then lie down on the soil, a new tree can be formed from a piece of wood. So that's how they reproduce. So that's willow. Also in a similar situation as in alongside watercourses and in wet soil, there is poplars as well. Poplars tend to be larger, and you can get some big old poplars in road planting schemes, but again quite fast growing and can be quite fragile. And on a lot of the poplar species, the leaves tremble as well in the wind.
We've got 2 questions, Eddie.
Yeah.
From Joanne. One, sorry, we're nipping back to the holly again, is how can you tell if a young holly is female or male? I want the berries, but none of my holly bushes produce berries, so should I get rid of them? I don't know what age they start to produce necessarily.
No, I don't either. I don't know the answer to that question. We can get back to you.
Joanne, if they were bought from a garden centre, if you can remember whether they referred to as kings or queens, because ironically the females are termed kings and the males are termed queen. So if you did buy them from a garden centre and you can remember that would be a clue. But I would suggest, if depending on how big they are, maybe give them a bit longer to grow if they're only small, and see whether they produce anything. The next question is, what type of willows are in the Mouse Manor at Brandon? I can't remember. I don't know.
Osier, because it has that long, slender leaf, doesn't it?
Probably, yeah.
I think it's osier. I think if I had to choose one, it would be osier. Yeah, have a look on Google or something like that on some of the tree guide websites. They're very handy.
I think osier is used for willow weaving, living willow structures
Right.
as well, isn't it? So that would fit as well.
Yeah. Of course, a big use for willow would be baskets. Yeah. I believe as well that paracetamol is in, or the chemical that's in paracetamol is in willow bark, isn't it? I think
it's aspirin. It's natural
aspirin. Yeah, I do apologise. Yeah.
So yes, if you chew on a piece of willow bark stick, you should start to feel the air around your lips go slightly tingly and numb, and that's the effect of the natural occurring aspirin.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Horse chestnut. Again, I know it's strictly a non-native, but I don't think we can't not mention the conker tree, can we? Introduced in 1616, according to the internet, so obviously that must be completely and utterly true. The older trees have a scaly bark, and that bud is really, really distinctive in that it's big, it's reddy brown, and it's really, really sticky. The twigs are quite hairless and stout. The conker is obviously loved by kids for obvious reasons, and it comes in that really spiky case. Quite threatened by tree diseases, bleeding canker, leaf blotch fungus, and leaf mining moth. Generally doesn't reproduce from those conkers, so they're pretty much always planted. There's been some sat in Brighton Wood for donkey's years, some quite big ones, certainly all the time I've been there, and don't appear to be doing any reproducing. They're just sitting there, and eventually they'll die, and then that'll be the end of them, which would be a bit of a shame, really. But yeah, the conker tree. Any questions on that, Lucy?
What's the best way to prepare your conker for a conker fight? You
Oil
just
and vinegar, I think.
bake it or vinegar? What's your?
I think it's vinegar. I'm sure there's something about if you boil them in vinegar, it works. I mean, with the canker, I think they reckon there's about 85% of the horse chestnut population in the UK is threatened by the canker or has the canker. If you're looking at a horse chestnut and you look up at the trunk and around the main branches, what you're looking for is if there's any area where there tend to be large streaks of black, where the bark is going black and possibly splitting as well. That's a sign that it has the canker in. And yeah, it's really hitting them, unfortunately.
Quite a shame, really. Okay. Oh, that's it. That's it. That's the end of my my presentation and run through a few trees. Any questions, please? Or anything to input?
Would you be running any more of this actually at Brandon, not virtually but real 3ID surveys or something like that?
Yes, Joanne, we're hoping that come the summer we'll be able to do something then. Obviously everything will be in leaf by then, so it will be a summer tree ID course. Normally we've had an actual face-to-face winter eye tree ID session that we've run each winter with the chance to actually look, you know, hands-on, looking at trees and branches and twigs and such like, and the buds, but obviously we can't at the moment. But yes, I'm hoping at some point in the summer we'll be doing something, and restrictions will allow us. It's certainly we haven't set a date for it, but we're certainly planning one.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks.
Yeah, it is more fun to do this thing face to face in the countryside, definitely, because you can look at and see stuff that you can't see on photographs and videos. But yeah, this is a second best, I suppose, isn't it?
I've got another question. How easy is it to transplant things like oak? Because I remember I had about 2 oak saplings in my garden. I dug them up and took it to the churchyard in my area, and but they didn't seem to make it, because I went back to check a year later and saw no sign of the oak saplings.
Always do it in winter. Always do it in winter. The smaller you can transplant it, the better. And always do not ever let the roots dry out. So dig up, if you're going to dig it up, dig as much soil and as much root as you possibly can. Bundle it in a plastic bag or in a plant pot or something. Quickly onto the next site. Put it in, and the soil level that was in the old, where it was in the old position, try and get that soil level to be exactly the same in its new position, and always do it when it's dormant. So December, January, February, perhaps into March, but always dormant winter months.
They don't like it, so they have as well oaks a long tap root, which is the long one before the side roots come out, and they don't like it if that gets broken, if that gets cut as part of the planting process or transplanting process. You can, if you're pot growing them, you can cut the tap root as it comes through the bottom of the pot, and then create a bushier side growth of roots, which can help with transplanting. But yeah, if you cut it when it's being transplanted, very often it doesn't like it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
Just seeing if there's anything else.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi, Pete.
Hi, Pete.
Do you tend to plant whips or saplings? And the other question is, how do you choose your trees? Do you do it based on biomass or number of species they'll support, or how do you do it?
So we normally, I mean, in our woodlands, we don't plant an awful lot of trees because we prefer to rely on natural regeneration. The exception being with the ash, and where we're needing to supplement species with that. We always plant, well, pretty much always plant bare-rooted whips. So they're fairly cheap, coming from nurseries, and we plant them in notches or in holes or in tees, as we would call it. So you create a slit in a T shape with your spade and lift it up and pop it in. The important thing with trees is to get that the soil level right. So you can normally tell where the soil level should be because there's a change in the color of the stem. So it's important to get that same level. What was the other part of your question, Pete? And how do we decide where what species to plant?
We're thinking of village-wide tree planting in this autumn, and
so there is something called the. Are you in Warwickshire? Yeah. So there's something called the Landscape Character Guidelines. Now, if you Google that and you put in Warwickshire County Council Landscape Character Guidelines, you could normally bring up PDFs of documents that people have written describing the characteristics of the landscape that you live in, whether that be Arden or Feldon or wherever. And they usually suggest a species planting mix within that and just work from that. They will describe a species mix for wet areas, for dry areas, for acidic areas, for alkali areas, or probably go off that a little bit, or ask Lucy or myself, and we can recommend. Lucy, we are pretty much not planting ash at the minute. That's right, isn't it?
No, yeah. There's no ash planting going on at the moment because we there are signs of some disease resistant, dieback resistant trees, but there isn't enough knowledge and enough stock basically to be planting dieback resistant trees at the moment. I know from a conversation a couple of years ago with somebody at the Forestry Commission, cherry seems to be the tree species that's replaced ash in plantation planting. And I did ask why was the reason, and she said she didn't know. She suspected it's probably one of those things that somebody decided for one wood that they were going to replace it with cherry, and that other people are copying, which is going to be quite interesting over the years because cherry doesn't get big
people have studied the species that are on ash and then gone, well, actually, what is another species that those invertebrates will go on that quite readily matches?
That's an interesting point. Yes,
there may be some of that. But yeah, it's a real shame, and there's a lot of concern about ash.
Yeah, I know that in having done work in the Heart of England forest, who are planting millions of trees, thousands of trees, they don't plant ash.
No, they plant sycamore, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the bird cherry and the wild cherry?
Let me just look at some notes.
Positioning of cherries, the way they grow, isn't it?
Do they grow the same? Or
They're similar in size, from what I remember, without looking up while Eddie looks. Their flower arrangement is different, which means that the cherries present in a different shape, if that makes sense.
okay.
And probably its habitat as well, growing different areas. I've got here that bird cherry is hilly limestone areas. And I don't know where wild cherry is. Be worth a Google. Have a look on the Woodland Trust.
Yeah,
is a really good website as well. I don't know a succinct answer to that. It'll be a quick Google search will reveal something. Yeah.
okay.
Just picking up on Joanne's question about other ID courses, I know you've mentioned apps and the like for tree ID. If you like a good old school book to look at and use, the Reader's Digest tree guide has a really good winter twig section to it for identification. So a lot of the tree ID books will have a picture of the twig, the winter twig, on the page about the individual tree. So you have to wade through your book looking at each individual page. Whereas the Reader's Digest one has a specific section to it where it is all the twigs, and they're categorized by their type, whether they've got thorns, whether they're coming out symmetrically on the stalk, whether they're alternating. So it's much easier to look through and identify what tree you're looking at from that. So yeah, if you like a book and not a phone or an app, that's the one I recommend.
I think it's out of print at the moment, but I know you can get quite cheap copies from Abe Books, abe.books UK.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sydney.
Oh, what? Sorry, I don't know whether I was listening correctly. Then, what was it? You were mentioning apps. Is the one you recommend?
Oh,
telephone apps for tree ID. I know that when we're out walking, we spend half an hour arguing over a tree and the app, the ID sometimes.
Start off on a website called www.treeguideuk, and then that's .co.uk. Start there. There isn't. No, I don't have an app on my phone. There isn't. Have you ever used one, Lucy?
No, my phone would die if I tried to put any more apps on it.
No, have a look at that treeguide.co.uk and the Woodland Trust as well. I don't know whether they've got an app. They're a pretty big, trustworthy organisation.
I've got a Woodland Trust app.
Right.
That's the one that's on my.
Not very detailed.
It's not very detailed.
No, I know. This is why we end up spending half an hour arguing on what the tree is.
There is the app. Sorry, I was just going to say there is the app Lens on Android phones, certainly, which is brilliant. It allows you to take the photograph of things, and that enabled me to identify a field maple the other day in a wood.
All right.
What's that called? Lens, Lens.
Google Lens.
I think it's LENZ.
Okay, thank you. I can't. Well, sort of it looks like initials type. No, I can't. TKYTE. As opposed to the Woodland Trust app is good, so they're obviously doing well with it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I just use the Reader's Digest book.
I know. I just walk around the countryside and I just look at trees and go, well, that's blah. And I have to stop myself. And when I walk around with people, I have to say it is this species because of this and this and this, rather than it's just this. Particularly with my kids. So yeah, that's why I've not used one particularly.
Yeah, the difficulty with the Woodland Trust is that you identify by feature. So
Yeah.
you've got to choose a feature, and then you end up at the end and it says, well, it could be one of these 4 trees. And
Right, okay.
sometimes it's easy to eliminate the ones that they've suggested, and sometimes it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is LENS. It's a free app. And it's not just trees. You can identify plants, flowers, all sorts. And I think places as well, buildings.
Oh.
Thank you.
But you can do birds from the bird song.
Warbler used to be good for that, but I keep uninstalling it. It won't work on my new phone.
I've just realised who T Kite is. Sorry, Tim. I've just looked back at the full list. Apologies.
Even if the apps become perfect at identifying it for you, it's quite nice to be able to do it from your own knowledge.
Yeah.
And also be able to impart that to
Yeah.
your children is what I'd really like to be able to do. Like,
Yeah.
tell your kids this is why that and how to identify. I think it's nice knowing. And
Yeah.
Well, you get brownie points, don't you, with your grandchildren? Because you can, especially with birds. I mean, if you wander around and say, "Well, that's a great tit," and they look at you and they say, "How do you know that?" And they, you know, so.
Yeah. I mean, really, most of the countryside that you walk around, you know, on walks and around fields, there's probably only 10, perhaps 15 common species that you come across. All the rest are, you know, in different parts of the country or in the middle of woodlands. You know, your oaks, your ash, your hawthorn, your blackthorn, sycamore, perhaps beech. These are the ones that are the most common, really.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying. It's a case of sitting down and just getting into a habit of doing it. Maybe taking your ID book with you and just getting a habit, and hopefully it'll just become second nature as it is with you.
Yeah, that's it. And
it's
just
the
look
same
around you when you.
Same with bird sounds. You just have to spend a bit of time, you know, listening to them, listening to recordings, and I think fairly quickly you can soon get into a habit of identifying them as well.
Yeah.
Picking up just on characteristics that Eddie was saying at the start of how to identify things. One species that's quite easy to get caught out by because we're not used to seeing it is elm. So if you, these days, unfortunately, if you see a tree that has been growing and has maybe got to about that kind of thickness and then started dying and dying back, and you can see the bark coming away, that's likely to be a young elm that's got to the point where it's too big and it's dying back. They can get bigger as well. If it's lucky, it will, some of them have become self-coppicing, so you'll actually see them sending out new shoots at the base as they know that we're in trouble further up. and then they carry on growing until they get big enough for the beetle to get in again, and then they die back and then they regrow. But not always. So if it's completely dead and you can see the bark coming away and there's signs of something's been under the bark and it's quite a rough bark, that's likely to be elm. But I have been caught out over in Wales with some friends looking at a tree for 5 minutes going, what on earth is this? And we couldn't figure out. And then it dawned on us, we were looking at a very mature elm that just hadn't been hit by, that was either resistant or it just escaped due to location disease. And we were so unused to seeing it, we just weren't, it wasn't there in our minds to think that was what it could be.
I don't know whether it's still there, but there's quite a big chunky wych elm in Snitterfield bushes.
Uh-huh.
And an elm on the way to Wellsbourne.
Yes.
From Barford. I was going to say the elm leaf is very distinctive because it's one side doesn't meet the other.
Yes.
At the bottom of the leaf, that's how I identify it.
Any other questions or comments from anyone? Oh, Pete, you're on mute. There you
go. Tell me about Snitterfield bushes. Never been there. It's come up several times in conversation.
Snitterfield bushes is a really interesting site. It is a SSSI, Site of Special Scientific Interest. So if you go down the A46 and over the M40, let's think. Yeah, carry on down the A46. It's between the villages of Snitterfield and Barley, and it is a site that's next to a World War II airfield, and the site has these amazing concrete tracks that run around it, and it is an ammunition store for the airfield, but it is a limestoney site. Lots of ash there. There is a really active team that are down there managing it, that are very knowledgeable about birds and butterflies, and I think he likes clearwings actually as well. And it's a fantastic site, if only for these amazingly wide concrete rides that go around the site. And there is this wych elm, that's just growing at the side of the ride. If you are interested in going down, I can probably give you a good reference for it if you go make contact with Lucy. I should be able to pretty much remember where it is, but it's a lovely site.
And it's open. It's open to the general public.
One of our nature reserves. So, are you a member of the trust?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it'll be the car park combination code, and you put that in, and you park on the other side of the road, and then there's a smaller section on that side of the road, and then you cross over the road, and the majority of the sites up there. But a lot of it is ash woodland. There's right side Coppicing going on. Yes, a smashing site.
Okay, so it's got a wildlife trust car park as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You'll find it on the website, Pete.
Yeah, I'll have
on
a
our
look.
website. There'll be a listing for that reserve.
Yeah, I'll have a look.
Yeah.
The concrete tracks are good for a bike ride as well, would you say?
Oh no, I think there's no cycling on site. Sorry.
Okay.
Walking only. I think that reserve. Yeah, just because it's SSSI. So yeah. I say they're concrete rides, but they might have a nice layer of mud and moss on them, so they're quite flat and easy to walk on, but they're not swept, shall we say.
I've never been there when it's not muddy.
And Tim has helpfully put the link in the chat if anyone wants to click on it and have a look.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that.
Should we call it a day at that?
I
Liz?
think so. I'm gonna stop recording